Inheritance forms a base leg of the trilogy, and it's the second most important concept that we can talk about when we discuss object-oriented programming. The reason that we place such an importance on it is because it allows us to expand or extend existing code. And we can do that through a process of examining for the most part, we examine the properties that the base class has, and then we see if there's some way to handle differences in other classes that will inherit part of the fundamental characteristics of the base class. So inheritance basically is the ability of one class to use the elements contained in another class, and to do it in a way that does not violate the concept of encapsulation. I got started, the biggest real program that I've ever had to work on, inheritance formed a fundamental component of it. What I had was a lady investor who approached me and wanted to track her investment properties. And essentially she had three types of properties. She had commercial apartments, and these could be anywhere from duplexes to, I think the biggest that she had was a 25-unit apartment. And then she also had a couple of strip centers, which were commercial properties. And then she also owned some individual homes. And what she wanted to do was to be able to track certain statistics and other pieces of information that would allow her to assess her investments, both for tax reasons and also for rate of return on her investment reasons. So the beginning point is to talk with the lady and find out what information it was that she felt was important to track for the various properties. So we sat down, we had a conversation, and what we wanted to do was to remove the common properties and collect together all of those common properties into one class. Then we would look for the divergent properties, and we would make a list of those. So we sat down and we came up with this list of things that we wanted to track on each one of the different types of commercial properties. Apartments, commercial property, residential, all of them have a purchase price. And you'll notice the first row has all purchase price elements in it. Purchase date she felt was necessary because if you hold a property in the state of Indiana for a certain amount of time, you get different state tax advantages to holding it. And of course, the address was important, the property taxes that she had to pay, the insurance premiums that she had to pay, and also the rent per month that she was taking in from each of the properties was important. All of them were mortgaged, so she had mortgage details that she wanted to track. And then things start to get a little bit different. There are certain city codes that require so many parking places per unit when you have an apartment complex. The same is true for commercial property, but if you notice below parking spaces under commercial, you also have to provide certain amounts of handicap parking. So that's a little bit different. With residential, you talk about garages and garage size rather than parking places. Apartments, storage units are important, and it's a big sales feature, so she wanted to track that as well. I mentioned the handicap parking with commercial. And then residential, another important feature in selling houses was whether it had a basement that could be used for storage. And then, of course, on apartments, bedrooms, bathrooms were important, and those were also important in the residential, although I didn't put them on here because I didn't want to extend the list, but obviously that's important too. Commercial, you're also required to have so many restrooms per square foot of rental space in a commercial property, so that meant tracking that and also the square footage of the commercial property. On the residential side, fireplaces, lot size, square feet, they were also could be measured as well. So what we did was we looked at all of these different elements of the investment, and we started to think, what can I do to organize this in the least complex way and make things do double duty? When we talk about inheritance, we can talk about a base class and a subclass. In the literature, you'll also hear this called a parent class and a child class. So if I use the term parent class and I talk about base class, those are actually the same thing. If I talk about a subclass or a child class, those are the same terms. But the important thing is that there's a relationship that has to exist between the base class and a subclass, or between parent and child. The storage class in the base class for any property that is in the base class is stored as protected. And that's denoted with the pound sign if we'd use the UML diagrams. So you can see here we have sort of a UML light version of the type of structure that we want to use with respect to our classes. What we have at the top is the base class, which is class building. And you'll notice that we've talked about different types of buildings, apartment, commercial, and residential, but they are in fact all buildings. What we've tried to do is to go through the table that we just saw and extract all of those properties that seem to be common to all three different types of properties. We will then take those common properties and put them into the base class, which in the diagram we're calling class building. And the reason that we do that is because all of the properties are of a type building in the general sense of the word. You'll notice the pound sign in front of each one of the properties. So address has a pound sign in front of it, all of them. And what this means is those properties all have the protected access specifier. And what protected means is that if you're not of a class building object, and that means that if I'm not a class building or I'm not one of the subclasses like class apartment, class commercial, or class home, the protected storage or access specifier means that I cannot see those properties outside of any one of those four classes. But by making them protected, what that means is that class apartment, class commercial, and class home has complete access to all of those properties as though they were public to those classes. So each one of those properties is fully visible in the subclasses without any special manipulation of the data or any methods that have to have special properties or exhibit certain behaviors. They are fully available to all of the subclasses. Now you'll notice in the diagram an arrow drawn from the base or the subclasses to the base class. What that means is that each one of those classes that you see at the bottom with the arrow pointing to the base class is a child of the base class. So it inherits all of the properties that the base class has. So you'll notice at the side a little arrow pointing to the three arrows going to the classes, and it says is a. So what we're saying is class home is a building. We're saying class commercial is a building. And we're saying class apartment is a building. So what we're just doing with this modified UML light diagram is showing the dependency of the subclasses on the base class and establishing the relationships that exist. What this means in essence is class apartment, commercial, and home all in fact have, for intent and purposes in the code and the way it works, all of them have an address, a purchase price, a purchase date, property taxes, insurance, mortgage payment, and rent per month. It's just like all of those properties are indeed part of the subclasses that we see at the bottom. Now, in each one of the subclasses, we have additional properties that apply to those, that are specific to those. So class apartment, for example, has covered parking, storage units, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms. And then class commercial has parking places, restroom, handicap parking. In other words, the properties in the subclasses are really what defines those as specific types of buildings over and above what we see in the class building property list. So we take the common features of the properties and we put those in the base class, and then we put the unique features as properties in the subclasses. And then we allow us to have an is a relationship to the base class.